Well, welcome back to another episode of the Deadly Digest, our show about psychos, sadists, and serial killers. And today we're covering the Zodiac, Part 2. Uh, I'm C.F. Roberts, local ne'er-do-well, and going to introduce you to my co-host.
Hi, I'm Delaney Bartlett. I'm your co-host, and I'm a true crime and horror writer. And I'm putting that on the lower third, local ne'er-do-well. I like that.
Okay. Yeah, well, it beats chimney sweep, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like I've gone up in the world.
Oh yeah, promotion, for sure. So we're coming back to the Zodiac case, which if you want to go back and watch part 1 and get all the details about the case, I encourage you to do that. And then come on back to part 2. So in part 2, we're now going to start talking about some of the suspects in this case because it was never solved, and there have been lots of suspects and lots of theories about who suspects could be. In fact, at one point, the authorities thought that maybe the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, could be the Zodiac.
Yeah, I think they're really punting with that one personally.
Yeah, that's a little odd. But there were a lot of people that came forward claiming to be the Zodiac, but, you know, they were all crazy. That happens with a lot of, you know, big murder cases. It kind of brings out the crazies. That I guess they just want attention or something. I don't know. But some of the ones that I thought were most interesting was this fellow named Steve Hodel. He had written a book called The Black Dahlia's Revenge, where he thought that his father, George Hodel, who was by that time already dead, was the murderer of the Black Dahlia. And, you know, I thought he made a pretty good case for that. But then he came out and said that his father was also the Zodiac killer. And I'm thinking, you know, that's a little bit of a stretch. I think he needed a psychiatrist and not a publisher on that one. So, yeah, George Hodel was one. And then there was another one that I was actually really kind of into there for a while, and it was a fellow named Earl Van Best, and it was another daddy issue thing where his son, who had been given up for adoption when he was an infant, he, you know, went through, did a lot of research and found out that his father was this man, Earl Van Best, and he ended up writing a book, The Most Dangerous Game, where he details all the reasons why he thinks that his biological father, Earl Van Best, was the Zodiac killer. For one, he very much resembled the sketch that was put out of the Zodiac, and I have to hand him that. This guy looked like the Zodiac sketch. He was in California during the times of the murders, and then he did show a lot of sociopathic tendencies that could possibly make him a killer. So I was kind of taken in by this for a while, but as I did more research and, you know, looked at what other people talked about, looked at more evidence, there were a lot of holes in the theory. One of them was that he uses his father's thumbprint, which has like a line from a scar or something in it, and says, oh, this, you know, matches up and looks like the Zodiac, but it doesn't actually. It doesn't match at all. The handwriting that he had analyzed, and this was kind of his crown jewel of his evidence, was he said, oh, here's this handwriting on my father's marriage certificate, and he took it to a document examiner who said, yes, this definitely looks like the same handwriting, but it turns out it wasn't Van Best's handwriting. It was the clergy member who married the two had filled it out. And in fact, researchers went and, you know, made sure that this was the case, and indeed the clergy member that filled it out was the person who did it, who filled out that marriage certificate, not was the Zodiac. But that would be interesting if it was some random priest somewhere in California who's been getting away with it all this time. That's kind of interesting. But also, the DNA evidence excluded him for sure. But the DNA evidence is something else that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So that brings us to what was considered sort of the prime suspect by a lot of law enforcement, and a lot of, you know, Paul Avery thought this, and, you know, a lot of people kind of think that the guy was Arthur Lee Allen. And Chuck, do you want to kind of talk us through what makes him the good suspect here?
Sure. Okay. Arthur Lee Allen. This guy, like a lot of people, I was basically sucked into this case through the book by Robert Graysmith, which the movie was based on. We'll talk about a lot of that later. He was described in the book, and also, this was opined by a lot of the investigators as being the most likely suspect. Just to go over his history, Allen had a dishonorable discharge from the Navy in 1958, was fired from his job as an elementary school teacher in 1968 after allegations of sexual misconduct with children, was described as fixated on young children and angry at women, and was never known to have a girlfriend or wife. 1972, San Francisco police obtained a search warrant for his arrest. 1974, he was arrested for committing lewd acts on a 12-year-old boy. Pled guilty, spent 2 years in prison. Was basically hounded and dogged by people who suspected he might be a Zodiac for the Zodiac for the rest of his life. Died in 1992. Police served a warrant, seized property, and lots of damaging evidence existed, but a lot of it was ruled circumstantial. 2002, DNA comparisons of Allen versus saliva on the Zodiac stamps. Some of the stamps that he licked for the postcards and letters and whatnot. They tested that on Arthur Lee Allen's DNA as well as that of Dan Chaney, who was a close friend who was one of the first people who suggested that Allen might be the killer. And neither test was a conclusive match. A police handwriting expert analyzed Allen's handwriting versus the Zodiac's and said none of Allen's handwriting came close to the Zodiac, nor did the DNA. And kind of on a weird personal note, one thing Allen's profile points to is that he was obviously a pedophile. The Zodiac himself has never really given any evidence that he was bent this way, so I don't know, conflation by authorities, incorrect conflation by authorities.
I tend to agree with that too. Like, he definitely seemed like maybe a dangerous guy, but I'm not sure that he would necessarily fit the profile of the Zodiac.
Yeah, obviously a creep, not necessarily the Zodiac.
Right, and I kind of want to go back to that DNA evidence too, because this is something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, that DNA is a killer.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I am not 100% convinced that the DNA on those stamps is the Zodiac's DNA. And the reason I say this...
You could be right.
...is I happen to know, back in the day, there were a lot of people who didn't like licking stamps for whatever reason. And so many that there were multiple different little inventions for moistening your stamps without using your tongue.
Yeah.
There was like this little wheel, it sat in a little pot of water, and you would rotate the little wheel and you could put the stamp on it. And there was
little sponges.
Little sponges. I mean, so that could have been the DNA from the postal worker who sold him this stamp. So I am not convinced that that is the Zodiac's DNA. Not that I am gunning for the Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac theory. I'm not on board with that 100%. And Chuck, I think you said you have a kind
Certainly
of a
not
favorite.
ironclad.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, my first interest in the case. One other thing I want to say about this with the Arthur Lee Allen story, just is the Zodiac murders. The book by Robert Graysmith is a good chronicle of the case. But he does the case a tremendous disservice, I think. This guy was a cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle who got embroiled in this whole caper and was emotionally, and it goes over in the script, it goes over in the book too. He's very emotionally over involved. He pretty much becomes a character in his own book and kind of, in a lot of ways, has just this hand-wringing kind of involvement, which empathy for the case, fine, but maybe back off a little if you're that hung up on the case. I don't know. Anyway, this kind of betrays him in a number of ways. First of all, in that he's so hell-bent on Arthur Lee Allen as the guy. But also I think that he goes along with the theories of some police, one being one that kind of goes through the book as describing the killer as a man of low intelligence. And this man of low intelligence is running circles around you guys and laughing at you. I think maybe you better reassess that. Anyway, just an aside. Okay, but I personally have a favorite suspect in the case, and I think there's actually a lot to it. But my personal guy for the case, which, let's get it right up front, this case will probably never be solved.
Yeah.
Much like the Jack the Ripper case, you know.
Let's get ready for hate comments in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Do your worst. Okay, Ross Sullivan, and now we're going back to the Sherry Bates murder. Closely linked with the Bates murder, worked at the Riverside Campus Library, and would have known her, would have seen her, probably dealt with her on a regular basis. Worked at the library, made people around him, fellow people who worked at the library, feel uneasy as students and whatever. After the murder of Bates, he did not show up for work and acted very suspicious. He's one of those guys who was known to kind of wear the same outfit every day, and
it was military outfit.
yeah,
right?
wore military boots, and there were prints of military boots around Sherry Joe Bates, and there were military boots found, military boot prints found at the scenes of some of the Zodiac killings. But he ditched those for a little bit and started dressing differently after that. He just wore different outfits. But so that's a little odd. But looked very similar. If you look at pictures of him, and we'll probably be showing you a couple, looks similar to the Zodiac police sketches, and the physical description, you know, right down to the size, the height, the widow's peak.
Right, and that goes back to the Arthur Lee Allen. Didn't look anything like the sketches. He was balding.
Yeah. Didn't really look anything like him. But the confession letter and Ross's handwriting were identical, and also very similar to the Zodiac's. Similar vocabulary and writing style. He had these. This one thing of his that was found was basically taken off a desk. It was a hunk of desk that they found, and it was this creepy poem that was scrawled on the desk, which, when you see it vocabulary-wise, very much reads like the Zodiac. And similar handwriting, similar language. Ross Sullivan took a cryptology class and wrote an essay on how to disguise your handwriting. 1968, moved to Northern California. He was in the area. Was diagnosed schizophrenic and was in and out of mental institutions for years. In fact, used to brag about it. It was also kind of a lot of stuff. He made class film projects. He was involved in those. One where he actually played a killer in a movie about a killer, which I don't want to hang that too much on him.
Yeah, but it was so realistic and creepy that the cops were actually called. Like, people who, I don't know, were on the crew, or somebody was like, this is way too realistic. And it was such a big deal, they actually wrote a piece up in the paper about it, in the newspaper.
And he was also a theater geek, and he was a big fan of Gilbert and Sullivan, particularly their play The Mikado, which you've heard about already in the description of this case. It was referenced in the Zodiac's letters. A member of the Lamplighter Theater in Chicago, that particular troupe in San Francisco, cited a person looking like Sullivan frequenting showings of the Mikado, which they were doing at the time, including a showing the night of the Stein murder, and pretty much positively identified Ross Sullivan as the guy he saw. Also, he died in 1977 of a heart attack. Communications from the Zodiac dropped off after his death.
Right. And on that History Channel series, they actually interviewed a librarian there at that Riverside College library who said that lots of people who worked with him and teachers and things said they thought he was the Zodiac. Like, he was so creepy that they automatically, well, they didn't say Zodiac. At that time, it was just the Sherry Jo Bates murder, but a lot of people thought he was responsible for the Sherry Jo Bates murder at the time.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, you know, I certainly don't wanna encourage, you know, convicting someone just because they're weird and everyone thinks they're creepy.
Yeah, well, go back to our first series on the West Memphis Three. You know, just
Exactly.
because someone's a weirdo doesn't mean they killed anyone.
We're innocent, yo.
Yeah, remember that when you watch this show.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I think I have to kind of agree with you. He looks really good for this.
Mhm. But and you've got your own crazy theory about this, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna float it out there because I'm not gonna pretend like I'm an expert in this case. I mean, I've just read a few things and watched a few documentaries, but it seems to me like there's so much variation in the victimology and the MO and the areas where they took place, and then there were some murders that the Zodiac took credit for that probably he didn't commit.
Mhm.
I kind of feel like there was more than one person involved. I mean, maybe they weren't working as a team, or maybe they were, but I mean, I feel like the person who was writing the letters was such an attention whore that they would just make stuff up and like find some other killing and be like, yeah, I did that too. And so I feel like there were probably other killers, and maybe one who was smart enough to be like, hey, this crazy MF's gonna take credit for it, I'll just let him. Like, you know, it just seems so random and so, you know, it follows no pattern, it seems like.
Of course, then maybe that's why the killer was never caught.
Exactly.
But
I'm kind of with you. I think Sullivan looks really good for this.
Sullivan looks good. I'm not opposed to the notion. I mean, I would attribute the canonical attacks to that one person, to the Zodiac. And I think Ross Sullivan's a good candidate. There are other ones that may look similar or have similar things, but yeah, they may not have necessarily been carried out by the same person. So I'm willing to go along with that.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe one day.
Copycats.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll know.
You know,
Which-
many of the communications are considered forgeries.
Yeah, and so there's some that are kind of controversial, where some people say, yes, this is definitely a Zodiac communication, and others who are equally as experienced and have as much information saying, no, it's a forgery. So it's
Yeah.
hard to even pinpoint like an exact number of communications.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Gospels.
Well,
Yeah,
okay,
well,
hate mail?
yeah, okay, yeah, churning out the hate comments now, sorry guys.
That's good. Your hate just pushes up higher up in the YouTube search engine. But speaking of the fact that there are so many theories, and it is such a big, well-known case that still, people are still interested in and passionate about, there have been lots of movies made.
Mhm.
And so I'm gonna
Yeah,
set
there
them up, I'm gonna set them up and you knock them down.
Okay.
So the first one is the 1971 The Zodiac Killer, which I actually did watch.
Mhm.
You kind of described it as a sleazy, exploitative grindhouse cash-in that started out following the case and then embarked on its own fictional storyline.
Yeah, it pretty much was made during the killing spree, so you weren't gonna get a factual conclusion.
No.
They made up their own minds, and it kind of had the take on it of, this could be anyone you know, this could be your neighbor, it's a horrible world.
Yeah.
But very exploitative.
And just bad.
Yeah.
Bad in so many ways.
No, the funny thing with this one was I caught that last April on a double feature. We have the Something Weird video of it, and it's on a double feature with another movie whose name escapes me at that point. And that one's but similar storyline, and that one is just real poorly lit, and obligatory nudity kind of thrown in here and there, and so my mind kind of blurs as to which one was the Zodiac and which one was the other one, but the Zodiac is actually the better watch of the two, I think.
Well, that's a really low bar, because my son kind of halfway watched it, like he left in the middle and came back, and he wanted to be sure and mention that it sucked so hard that he wasn't even paying attention, and he could see and hear how badly it sucked. It was really crazy. Like, it starts off with this first person narration, like it's the Zodiac talking to you.
Yeah.
And then it goes through this weird storyline. Like, the first 30 minutes is just dripping in sexism. Like, I know it was 1970s, but I almost feel like it was even over the top for 1970. It was really,
this
really
movie,
sexist.
This movie takes place in a horrible world where nothing good can ever happen to anyone.
Exactly. But then, pretty soon it becomes clear that they are setting it up that this is the person who's the killer. And this person, it's like they've never watched a true crime show, because they just took every possible psychotic thing they could think of and just tossed them all into this one character. So it was completely unrealistic and weird.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, it goes back to that first person narration, and it starts really sounding like one of those 1950s social hygiene films.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was like so preachy and just.
Yeah, they're kind of closely related. The hygiene films and then the nasty sexploitation flicks. They do have a narrative thread.
Yeah, I will say that there wasn't a lot of the nudity and gratuitous sex.
Yeah.
So at least it had that going for it, but I don't know, the massive amount of sexism in the first 20 minutes, I feel like negates any, it puts it into the negative points. Any good points it might have gotten for anything are just, no. But, okay, moving on. Let's move on. And I didn't know this until I read the script when you wrote it, that Dirty Harry, the original 1972 Dirty Harry flick, the bad guy was based on the Zodiac.
Yeah, he was. Dirty Harry, which is a good movie, it was condemned by Roger Ebert as being pro-fascist, which actually I kind of agree.
Yeah.
But still, entertaining movie, kind of action classic. Was very much influenced, takes place in San Francisco, very much influenced by the Zodiac case. The killer, played by Andy Robinson, brilliant performance by Andy Robinson, playing just this drooling psychopath. He plays a killer known as Scorpio, who kind of casts a wide net as far as the people he wants to target and the people he wants to kill. And he's a sniper who's knocking off people in swimming pools and kids playing around in the projects, and then eventually starts threatening to kill a priest or a black person, starts threatening to kill other people, eventually kidnaps this girl and ends up killing her.
And sends notes.
Sends notes, sends threatening letters that he's going to do all this stuff. Eventually hijacks a school bus full of kids. Zodiac talked in one of his rambles about how he wanted to shoot off the wheels of a school bus and pick off the kids as they came out. They actually kind of go there to a degree. But yeah, very much a product of the time and the place.
Yeah, and it was released in 1972, so I'm sure they were filming it in 70, 71 maybe.
Yeah.
When the Zodiac was still kind of considered to be active, people were still probably waiting for the next Zodiac attack.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did not know that. And then that brings us to a movie that I have not heard of or seen, the limbic region. It was made for TV movie in 1996. Is that
Yeah,
right?
1996, released on video.
The mark of true quality.
Mhm. It was one of those things where I'm getting off work, I'm at the video store at 7 in the morning, it's like, okay, well that looks interesting. And so I picked that up and brought it home, and lo and behold, it was basically a Zodiac influenced movie. Not bad, better than average. It follows a detective played by Edward James Olmos, who's nearing retirement. He's obviously modeled after Dave Toschi, who was one of the main detectives on the Zodiac case. And he's obsessed with a murder suspect that got away. And the murder suspect played pretty wonderfully by George Zunza, which hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Great character actor. Is obviously supposed to be Arthur Lee Allen, and the whole movie is basically as these guys age down toward the end of their lives. It's kind of a cat and mouse game between them, and not a bad movie.
Okay, maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Based on your good recommendation.
Yeah, not bad for what it is.
Okay. Well, and then that brings us to our final one, the 2007 movie directed by David Fincher, Zodiac. And I really liked this movie.
Yeah.
It was based on the Grace Smith book, as you
Mhm.
said. And
Very well made, I think.
Yeah.
Very faithful to the book.
Yeah, and David Fincher, I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think anything he does just looks awesome. So
Mhm.
I'm behind it. But yeah, it definitely follows the cartoonist, and it's got Robert Downey Jr. playing Paul Avery, the reporter who covered
Yeah.
a lot of the Zodiac attacks. But you know, Robert Downey Jr. always plays Robert Downey Jr., so I don't really know. I kind of feel like I can't really trust that was really Paul Avery. Was he really an alcoholic? He was addicted to all these drugs, or is that just Robert Downey Jr.?
Yeah, quit your Downeying, dude.
Yeah.
But well, I know at least in accordance with the Graysmith book that the Zodiac case wrecked a lot of people, and it wrecked a lot of people's lives, and yeah, people basically wound up, retiring and drinking themselves to death and all kinds of stuff, and yeah, it really was the end for a lot of them. They were never the same afterwards.
Yeah, that especially for the law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the good ones really do want to put this guy behind bars, and they never were able to.
Yeah.
The thing I kind of liked about it, though, was that even though this is an old case and most people kind of already know most about it, it still had a lot of suspense. It didn't really kind of key in on one person until towards the end. So there were, at different points in the movie, you were thinking, oh, it could be this guy, it really looks like this guy, but then, oh, something else comes along and you think it's somebody else. So I did like that they did that they kind of kept you in suspense, and it wasn't just, obvious from the very beginning who it was.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he, as you said earlier, was very much in the Arthur Lee Allen fan club, so to speak, that this was the guy who
He was in the
did
camp.
it. Yeah, so, but it was a really good movie, and I highly recommend it
Yeah.
for anyone who likes not just true crime, but any kind of suspense or thriller type movie. It's really good.
Yeah, it's very well done, and I think it's if you want to find out about the case, it's a good gateway. But as far as the Zodiac case proper, in April 2004, the San Francisco PD marked the case inactive, citing caseload pressure and resource demands. Go figure, it's the budget, and they effectively closed the case. They reopened it, though, sometime before March 2007. The case is open in Napa County and in the city of Riverside. In May 2018, the Vallejo Police Department announced their intention to attempt to collect the Zodiac killer's DNA from the back of stamps used during his correspondence. We've already kind of talked about that. The analysis by a private laboratory is expected to utilize an advanced new technique that is able to separate DNA from the glue present on the back of the stamps. It's hoped that the Zodiac killer may be caught in a similar fashion to the Golden State Killer. In May 2018, the Vallejo police separate detective that said that the results were expected in several weeks. However, as of October 2019, like this past year, no results have been reported.
Yeah, and we're filming this at the end of November,
Yeah,
and I still haven't heard anything.
yeah, it's the most recent word, folks.
Well, that's it for another episode of the Deadly Digest, and that's it for season 1. Thank you so much for staying with us through all of our various cases. We're going to take a break over the holidays. We'll be back this spring with more psychos, sadists, and serial killers.